Is there anybody that is new to this call and would like to take a moment to introduce himself and say hello to the group?
Hi, everyone. I don't think I've ever been in one of these calls before. My name is Ryan. I work at Docker. I have worked on Docker Hub in the past, and most recently I work on DTR, which is our enterprise registry. So nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you, Ryan. Anyone else? Okay, cool. This is a slot open for demos. Does anyone have something they'd like to show?
We'll show something as part of the registry stuff, but I think it's better once we've explained what's happening before we demo.
Got it. Okay, awesome. Then I'll just move into the next item, which is the announcement for CNAB joining JDF.
Yeah, so this last week, the first round of paperwork signed, which means we are now officially part of JDF as a standard body, and there's still additional paperwork that needs to go on. Ooh, there's a train. So we've got a few more things to do, but one of the first things I had to do was update section 901. That would be 901, not 90 train noise, in order to make it meet the JDF's requirements for what our process has to be. So I'm going to be tinkering around with various other things. This is awesome over the next week, and try and get that prepared. That's it.
Awesome. I'll aboard the JDF train then. All right, next one. We have a request to review and comment on duffle PR 741 thick bundle relocation. I think this is Glyn.
Yeah, a couple of reviewers came out of the woodwork. Radu's been on it for a while, and someone else chimed in, so that's fine. But if anyone else cares to dive in, it's quite a big PR, so it'd be benefit from a couple more eyes.
If you have 3 minutes at the end of the meeting, we can chat.
Sure, yeah.
Sweet. Up next is parameters, JSON schema, and required, and then a link to the required section. Someone have a question about this or a comment?
I can provide context on that. This was brought up by Ivan, actually, but he's in New Zealand, so it's a little hard to represent. The problem we found is that originally required was being placed in one location, and then we added JSON schema. And then at the moment, it's camping in a location where we can't have a parameter named required as well. And we were wondering if it would make sense to actually move it so that it sits one level higher, so that it's not at the same level as the names of all the other parameters as well. I think, let me look at that short link real quick. Sorry, I'm trying to represent what he was pointing out as the problem.
As one of the folks who was bringing that in as a PR, I can speak a little bit to the decision. Not that I think it's a good one. The cnab-spec has, as far as I can tell, 2 different sections where you would have effective configuration. So there's parameters and the credentials section. And so when it came time for us to say, like, this subsection of the set of parameters are required, it felt weird to pull that out to have it only apply to one of those sections. We could maybe say, have a field like required parameters. It just was like unclear to me what the ramifications of doing that were. So I don't know. We settled on what we have now, but like I also am not terribly happy with that as a final landing point. So if we could come up with something that's better, I would agree that that's probably a good overall thing for the spec, because it makes sense for folks to be able to have a parameter called required. That seems like a reasonable ask.
Yeah, I think the idea was either we need to document that it's a reserved thing so that people don't wonder if it was intentional, you know, because just at the moment it was a little ambiguous. Or we move it up one level like it is with JSON schema. And so it matches what JSON schema does. So either just document what we do so people don't wonder, or tweak it so it matches how JSON schema works. Because we get it right, I think, at one level where we use required, and then it's just kind of weird. I think it's an artifact of how we switch things around in the other. So I think it was just brought up so that we're aware that we ended up making it a reserved parameter name, and then deciding like, are we okay with it being reserved? And if so, let's document. Otherwise, let's move it to a different level.
Could we prefix it with a dot or something like that? If we're going to have these reserved words.
I'm sorry, can we?
A prefix required with dot, like so dot required instead of required, and then only allow, and make it so that you can't use the ones that that start with the dot.
Does that follow JSON schema conventions? Or $sign?
Oh, kind of like comment is reserved. I see you're nodding. Is maybe something we could do like, is it okay to vote in this meeting, or is it better to maybe open an issue and have people vote?
We should probably open an issue because I'm sure the people who aren't here would be like a little bit offended.
Okay.
I would be. So yeah, maybe we could open an issue for this and lay out the potential solutions and then vote on it there.
All right. Sorry, I'm trying to note take and talk at the same time, so I'm gonna shut up now. Write this down.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll continue that conversation and the issue that gets started. Up next is thick bundle spec issues. Glyn.
Yeah, this came up because someone pointed out that in the cnab-spec, there are various hints about, for instance, relocation, original image, and that kind of stuff. But there's nowhere in the spec that actually ties it all together and says, what's this for? Why would you use it? How would you use it? So I wondered about adding a non-normative section on usage of thick bundles to the 800 section. We've got plenty of stuff in duffle, but not everybody that reads a spec will go and then read the comments in duffle, I suspect. What do people think?
Chris G and I think have been discussing something very similar over this week too.
Yeah, I think that actually might be a good section to include. So I was trying to condense the kind of the air gap issues. I think it's been across 3 or 4 issues into a non-normative, and I think that's actually a perfect second half of that. Like, you know, here's the use case, and then here's how thick bundles relate to that use case. So I'll connect with you, Glyn, to get an early PR with that. Just kind of capture what we want to.
Yeah, and we'll kind of evolve the structure because it probably needs to be more general than we start out with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The second one was tar file naming, and that was just a bit of an awkwardness because the current spec is a little bit slack when it comes to how tar files are named relative to image names. And I just wanted to float the possibility of doing away with the tar file representation altogether and just leaning on the OCI image layout standard. But there are some downsides to that because if you're going to store VMs and such like, then we'd have to store VMs in an OCI image layout, which might seem like an unnatural act.
Actually, I was thinking about that, and I think ORAS would be a good solution for storing VMs in an OCI registry.
Sorry, OS.
ORAS.
It's a terrible line. ORAS.
ORAS.
ORAS. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Right. Yeah. I'm thinking mainly about the file representation.
Yeah, Glyn, I just remembered you had asked a question about that, and I don't think I ever got back to your question on the VM option. And I think it's really up to what I call the artifact owner, and somebody, obviously VMs is a pretty big thing for somebody to kind of lick that lollipop and say that this is how VMs would be in a registry. But if somebody like the Singularity folks, they actually push one big layer, and there's pros and cons to that, but that was their choice. And VMs are basically one big file blob as well. If somebody wanted to do that, that would be fine. I would actually move to something of multiple files, so they could be concurrently downloaded and then reassembled. It's obviously a little more complex, but
Okay.
it also is specific to whoever wants to write that. But those would not be OCI image layers. Those would have to have its unique MIME type, media type, because those would not be, like a Docker client couldn't pull those down intentionally.
Okay, so stepping back, if we regard the OCI image layout as being essentially a registry on disk, then we can do what ORAS does for the kind of remote registries.
We just need to make sure we can sign and SHA some or checksum whatever it is we have on disk, because one of the necessary features of moving across an air gap is to be able to verify on either side of the air gap that the artifact is the same and untampered with.
That's interesting. Right. Okay, so it's not a done deal, but it sounds like it might have legs, that approach. The alternative is to tighten up the spec of the tar file naming, and it just seemed to have so many little rough edges that it was going to be painful. And I don't mind doing that or helping someone else do that, but it seemed like it was on a hiding to nothing. Unless someone's particularly wedded to tar files.
Actually, what Chris will present about cnab-spec, I think it overlaps a little bit with the fig bundle representation, and the demo I will do to use OCI layout to implement fig bundles might give some insight. Yeah, and we also thought about digital signature and how it will fit with the air gap scenario as well. So yeah.
Okay, there is a link there anyway to the tar file naming issue. So if you want to chime in on that, that'd be excellent. And so in terms of this thick bundle spec issues, I'll go away and work with Chris on the first point, and then we can work the issue on the second point. I think that's probably enough for now, unless anyone's got other comments.
I think the one thing, and I've Radu had actually pointed it out, and I think the one thing that I would like to get to just kind of put us in the right place for this is to get that kind of generic CNAB binary blob artifact created on the registry side, or at least nail down that schema for here's just a blob, and for now we could put multiple things in that, and as things evolve or mature, VM smartly gets broken up and becomes its own artifact type, and then that will allow us to have, with the idea being our export / thick bundle becomes, here's the list of things you need to get, the OCI images that are mentioned, and then these CNAB artifact things, and then like Helm is probably going to be the first thing that I kind of see evolving. I think that's also tied to Steve's issue that he put in, but if we get the CNAB artifact, I think that positions us to have everything we need for to get to V1 and be able to tackle all the use cases. Maybe not perfectly clean, but I think we also need to get V1 so we can start iterating and see where the user experience falls apart, to then kind of say, oh, Helm is a great artifact type, or no, this was the worst idea ever, maybe this is a better artifact type. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts, and I could take the action to put an issue and kind of work with Steve and Radu to get the CNAB artifact type created. And I think that's actually, I think that's effectively going to be an ORAS artifact type, just called CNAB, and has a little pretty icon next to it.
Yeah. That sounds great for a registry, but it really makes me wonder whether we want to use that representation in a thick bundle. Because having the CNAB itself inside the OCI registry seems a little bit chicken and egg kind of problem. It might be good.
I think that was the question I was still trying to wrestle with, was, is the persistence in a registry, is a thick bundle something that is in a registry, or is a thick bundle a thing that you take locally because you're trying to put it on a USB stick? Like, I'm not sure I understand what the scenario is for a bundle to be represented as a thick bundle in a registry, as opposed to when I'm getting this bundle, I want it as a thick bundle because I'm trying to put it in air gap. I'm trying to do A, B, or C with it.
I think it's the latter. If you put a thick bundle in a registry, it doesn't really serve much purpose. I think we've discussed elsewhere that a thin bundle achieves the same thing.
You don't have any guarantees on the underlying images existing. That's the fundamental problem. So if you just reference things by name, you can't guarantee that they exist. Even by char, they'll just get deleted. So the point of referencing them in a registry is so that the whole thing is an atomic unit inside the registry, which means you can move it from repo to repo or registry to registry without signatures changing and whatnot. But we'll go into that in our presentation.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, you're going to talk about that?
Yeah, that's one of the key reasons we designed CNAB to OCI like we did. I see Radu's got a hand up.
One thing to point out here, I'd like to point out, is the distinction between having the bundle file in a registry and then also the referenced images from the bundle into the registry. And the other is having the representation of the whole tarball of the thick bundle itself. Those are two different things. And I'd like to make the distinction between them when we refer to thick bundles, because it's only going to lead to confusion.
Yeah, when we say thick, we mean something that's still understandable by a registry. Anything that's shoved into a tar layer, the registry can't see and doesn't really understand. So what we want to do is have an OCI or a registry, a full graph of everything inside the registry. And that's what we mean by a thick bundle. But yeah.
I think it's time to move on then, isn't it?
How is that different than a manifest or an index that references layers?
A layer you don't have any insight into at the registry level. You have to get the layer to read it, whereas the OCI structs already have meaning that registries understand. So for scanning and things like that, it's easier to have images as manifests, for example, than as layers.
Okay, well, you said you wanted to present something, so I want to hear, because I've been trying to understand the requirements that needed to be different for what Glyn was just referring to, so I'll wait and hear.
Yeah, point of order. I think we're probably done with my item now, so shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, Chris, take it away.
Okay, so we've got, thanks for having us, everybody. We've got a couple of people here. We've got Simon and Sylvain, who work on my team as part of the developer tooling people. Actually, I don't see Sylvain here today. And then we've got Ryan in San Francisco, who works on DTR. So we worked on this collaboratively in December last year, the CNAB to OCI stuff. I will present my screen so that everybody can see that. Let me present screen 2, that should be good. And so we developed this with our registry team because we knew that we weren't the experts to be doing this. Let me just make this full screen now. All right. Can everybody see the slides? Yeah, good. All right, thank you. So to answer the question of where it came from, so we basically, this is a lot of text, and I'll put the slides on the CNAB channel so everybody can get them afterwards. We basically want to bring the same flow we have for container images to applications. And so in order to do that, we think that the sharing part of the story and the being able to store these things in registries is a key part of that experience. And we know that this flow works because it's very popular already with containers. So there's this idea of having some source, turning it into an immutable artifact that's stored in a registry, and then making it running code later on. We'd also like the same best practices. So we want immutable artifacts, content addressability, signing, content trust policy, so you can only run the thing if it's been signed, and so on. We have what we call a promotion flow. This is essentially just moving an object from one repo to another repo. We use this for CI purposes. So for example, I get push something, my CI builds an image, it pushes it to a test repo, tests are run against it, it gets promoted to a staging repo, and then that can be, only once it's in the staging repo can be deployed to a cluster, for example. So the requirement for this promotion flow is that we don't want the signatures on anything to change. We want to keep everything, we want to keep the content exactly the same. We also want to be able to mirror. So for example, if I'm in one geography and I want to pull an application and everything with it to another geography, we want an easy way to do that. And then obviously we want the air-gapped case. The other part of this is, so well, if we're trying to match the container flow, well, what can we reuse? I work for a developer tooling team. I did not want to write a registry for applications. So instead of doing that, we leaned on our DTR and hub teams to give us ideas on what we could reuse and how we could move forward with this. So we wanted to use the OCI formats because those already exist and they work everywhere. And specifically the OCI index, which comes from, as I see there's a chat coming up, I will try to read those in parallel. There we go. Specifically the OCI index, which came from the multi-arch images. So it already has this notion of a list of things that we want to reason about. And then all the tough, the update framework or the notary stuff for signing artifacts we wanted to re-leverage because we just didn't want to reinvent the wheel there. So as I said, the OCI index was developed to handle multi-arch images. It requires all the referenced images are in the same repo because it references things by digest only. So there's no notion of where the object comes from. It has to be in the same repo. And this is because if we put information about which repo the object is in, when you move repo, it'll change that prefix, which means that the signature will change because the content's changed. So that's why it's like that. So the reason we chose, or we thought an OCI index would be the best way to tackle this is because just looking at the use case we had for CNAB and for which everybody else has, we have this notion of an invocation image and then a bunch of other images or artifacts. And the most natural fit that we saw with the OCI structs was this one. We also wanted to reuse something that was as close as possible to what we wanted to do because we wanted the registry to not require massive code change to understand the artifact. Once again, lazy engineers. Let me just go through this to see if I've missed anything. Yeah, so the big key there is when we move repos, we don't want those digests to change because otherwise the signature on the whole artifact will change. And then we wanted to be able to provide, to use annotations to give the registry more context about an application at the top level, so it didn't need to navigate this big tree to understand what was inside the application. So this also comes from the motivation is also around separation of concerns. We want to be able to rely on the registry infrastructure and the OCI infrastructure, the structs and whatnot for images and and indexes to give us the guarantees that we require around storage and security. So instead of trying to rebuild the trust layers higher up, we want to leverage what we already have, and that creates a nice separation of concerns. If anybody would like to interrupt, please just go ahead, or if you have any questions about a specific point. I think this is a lot of content, so. And then, yeah, just once again, one of the things that's key to us is the chars and the signatures don't change when we move things around, because if we have to rewrite the bundle whenever we move things around, then we will have to re-sign things, and we won't be then guaranteed that what we had before was what was correct.
Sorry, just going back to the previous slide, but one, yeah, that one. Yeah. You were talking about the, you're talking about the, trying to replay your words now, it's a bit fast.
Sorry.
Yes, reusing the kind of trust layer or something. Basically wanted to package things as images to reuse some of the infrastructure in the registry.
Yep.
I can see that that's kind of like a pragmatic solution, but it feels a bit artificial to regard a CNAB as an image.
So it's not a single image. There are multiple types. There's an image manifest, which is a single image, and then there's an OCI manifest, which is to represent a single image, and there's an OCI index, which is a list of manifests. So we chose that as the representation. Sorry to cut you off.
Okay, right. So, I mean, does it feel like you're kind of shoehorning the CNAB into OCI in that approach?
So yes, there are some trade-offs, and I'll talk about them later. But what we wanted to avoid, though, was having to make changes to the OCI spec to get this to work. So I think we will need to for a V2, but I think for V1, we need to validate that this is a good idea. And I think the trade-offs we made are acceptable for the timeline we have and for what we're actually doing.
Okay.
Ideally, we'd want a CNAB object at the OCI level, right, where it's just perfect for what we want to put inside the registry. But then we have to get every single registry provider to accept that as a thing, and we have to get all the registries working with that thing. It's going to be, that's years.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's necessarily true, but I don't understand registries enough, so I'll pass. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
no problem. I'm taking notes, and I want to make sure that I wrote down just one key part of this right. The bundle JSON, is it stored as an image, or is it decomposed into metadata? I wrote down it's decomposed into metadata and saved as annotations in the registry.
So at the moment it's decomposed. The reason it's decomposed is because the image references inside the bundle.json include the repo/image : tag at char. And the problem is that prefix part changes when you move an image from one repo to another. And so to ensure that the contents hash of the bundle.json does not change between when you move everything from one repo or registry to another, we needed to abstract that out to another level. And so we pulled it up to the OCI index level, because at that level, it's just a char, because all the images have to be inside that repo, so they don't need that prefix. And so it means that all the content doesn't change, which means the signature stays intact.
Oh, you're saying so the registry prefix isn't part of the bundle hash anymore once it gets turned into the annotations? Because it's all set in registry? Because
an OCI index can only reference images inside the same repo, which means you don't need it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And so this means you don't need to rewrite the bundle.json. We then also decomposed the rest of the information because we wanted to surface some stuff as annotations. That was purely to prevent duplication, but there's absolutely no reason we couldn't just duplicate it. If it creates a burden on people understanding or on implementation, then maybe duplication is a simpler path forward than making it really complicated to reconstitute the object.
Okay, thanks.
So, Chris, everything you outlined and all of the flows and everything all make perfect sense. So I was trying to, from a requirements, all that makes perfect sense. And the place I'm struggling is where it had to go different. Like, for instance, the signature problem with the repo being part of the signature is a fundamental problem of content trust. And I think we're the only other registry that has implemented it. And this was one of the struggling things that we find, is because it limits the ability to sign an image. I'll take an image like we put out an MCR. I can't, or Docker for that matter, I can't move it into my private registry that I need as a best practice for my deployment and keep that signature, because the signatures don't float with it. So this is one of the things that we've actually been talking to Justin Cormack about, changing so that we do have that. So I think that's the only thing that I heard that was of a real concern. The OCI registry stuff, I mean, where we've landed and how we're doing Helm and Singularity and now OPA, I just love thinking like Greek OPA. Anyway, solution is we've got it working in ACR with really almost no change to the spec. AWS has agreed to do the same work. We have a loose agreement from Google. There's just a little different conversation there. So it is part of what we're landing in the distribution spec. So I'm struggling on the pieces that are missing that we couldn't do with the approach we've been taking with the artifact registry work. And I don't really care whether ORAS is not. ORAS is just following an implementation guideline to achieve that same goal. So what is it that we're missing that doesn't work, where we can keep this artifact separate and then reference them by their digest if somebody wants that, and if somebody doesn't want the digest, they can reference the stable versions, because both are valid scenarios. We absolutely want to support signing, but the current signature model, maybe this is where the stuff that Matt Butcher's been doing with Tough will be a better solution than we have with Content Trust today.
Yes, the fundamental issue is that if you include the bundle.json as content inside the inside the whatever you store in the registry, it will change when you move things around. And so we were talking earlier today about a thin bundle approach where you would just have the bundle.json, which would mean that every single time you wanted to move it, you would need to rewrite it. For us, that doesn't work in our flows. It's if you break the signature every single time you move it, that means that you don't have security in the end, because how do you know that it hasn't been tampered with in the moving it? I agree that there's something that needs to be solved.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
If we could solve some of these things at the TUF or notary level, that would be interesting. But if everything is content addressed and the content changes, then I don't see an easy solution.
But so I agree with you, but I think the piece that like we've now, and I think Google does this as well, we do server-side imports of images to maintain those digests. You're right that the content addressable part that Content Trust uses and DTR use don't flow properly, and that's why you guys re-sign them as you move flows between. So I think I'm nervous about trying to tie this to a DTR specific workflow as opposed to going back and solving the true signing issue that we all struggle with. From a software company trying to ship software to a company trying to sign their images as they move them between environments and registries.
So I don't think this is a DTR or hub specific issue. If you need to change content, the content address will change by definition, and therefore the signature will change. So I mean, we need, unless you can trust tags in other places, which you shouldn't. The only way to do this that I see is by having everything inside the same repo, and by addressing things with by content, and that way you move the whole thing together, which means that the signature stays intact. I don't think it's something we can easily solve, or maybe even possibly solve elsewhere. But I'm not an expert in that domain.
If I can weigh in here, so content trust is certainly one factor that went into this decision that we made, and it's a big advantage to this, right, is the fact that we have this one immutable artifact and you can move it around, and any signatures that you apply to it, in theory, with proper mirroring of signing metadata, when you move the artifact from one place to another. But the other major impetus to this design was to ensure that the app itself is a single artifact. If you have access to the repository in which the application is contained, you can deploy services based off of all of the images that are referenced from within the application. And it sounds like with ORAS, you can do the same thing. The only thing is, as a registry owner, it needs to be part of the registry's responsibilities to ensure that we don't garbage collect images that are referenced within the artifact. And if those sub images are referenced in an OCI compliant manner, then we already have that guarantee based up from any registry that's OCI compliant that those images won't be garbage collected.
Right, that's what the index and the manifest do, and the ORAS approach does, is it just references things. The fact that they are Docker images, I'm sorry, I'm air quoting, nobody can see. The fact that they're one artifact type or another is irrelevant. There's a manifest, whether it be an index or an image manifest, an artifact manifest is what I'm trying to call it now. That's the information to the registry that says, don't garbage collect any of these sub things. So you have all that capability with the other approach, but you also get the ability to use elements individually, that they don't get re-represented in the registry as these big monolithic blobs. And we are, from a signature point of view, like, again, we support content trust. We geo-replicate across 37 different regions. We do keep the digest the same. So we don't have this problem, and we've been doing it with Helm charts as well since last November. So I'm struggling a little bit on why, since we are using the index to reference all these things, the registry understands them. At this point, the only thing that I heard was good meat about it, which has been a historical problem, is the signature. And
hey, Steve, sorry to cut you off, but I just want to give Chris enough time to be able to do the presentation, and maybe we can have this discussion afterwards, if that'd be okay with everyone.
Yeah, I was jumping in because you asked for questions, and I thought we were at that point. That's fine.
Yeah. Thanks.
I just didn't want people to get caught up along the way and not understand the rest. But sorry. Let me click there. So these were some of the issues that were raised in the last meeting. Unfortunately, we were at DockerCon, so we weren't part of this. So it seemed like the major concern was around the separating of the bundle into bits instead of just storing the bundle.json as a blob. So as I explained earlier, the problem with storing the bundle.json as a blob is that if the images move, if the images that are referenced inside it change, you will need to change the bundle.json, which means that you need to re-sign it and you need to regenerate it and re-sign it. And so that's why we did that. The only piece that absolutely has to be pulled out is the image references. Everything else could be duplicated. That would just be duplication. Just something else that triggered my head when Steve was talking. When you push things to a registry, it does layer deduplication. So the only thing that's actually duplicated when you push an application and all the images with it is the manifests, and that's it. And so that's just JSON. It's not like the underlying layers are duplicated. The other hesitation around the CNAB's OCI approach is that we use annotations and we require them because they store information. This was a choice just to give more visibility to registries. This is not completely required. We don't have to do that, but we think it's the correct direction to do that. And then yes, there was basically, from what we could tell from reading the notes, it was basically just around regenerating this bundle.json. The way we see the bundle definition is it's purely an in-memory representation, and that the registry implementation is the thing that is actually signed and the thing that you actually trust in the source of truth. So what you do is you pull that down, generate something in memory that you use to do other things, but it's not the source of truth in the big scheme of things. And because the top level object CNAB or the OCI index is signed, you're guaranteed that everything else inside it is safe. So the known pain points and limitations, it's difficult to reconstruct the bundle definition from the registry representation. This we discussed earlier, I won't go into that. So you can only an OCI index can only reference images in the same repo. This means that you need to move all of the application images together. But as I explained earlier, this is because that ensures the signing and the promotion flows work well. So moving things around as an atomic unit works. There are some Docker-specific annotations inside CNAB's OCI. This was just because we put it together quickly and we need to pull those out. We definitely need to document CNAB's OCI better. We need to add examples. We need to explain this better. I think that's part of the problem. We're also using a forked container D because we needed to add support for mounting. Mounting is the ability to basically no-up copy or zero copy layers inside the same registry. So then onto thick bundles, which is what was discussed earlier. We think that the correct way of doing this then is if the source of truth is the bundle represented by this OCI index inside the registry, then we should just leverage once again what we have already for OCI images, and that is the image layout, because that just does everything for us. And so this is just to Glenn's point earlier. So it's the same as what's stored in the registry, which means we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Everything is just handled correctly, and we can rehydrate everything inside another registry if we want to, if it's air-gapped, or put it on a device and use it. And then if everybody's okay with that so far, Simon had prepared a demo to show exactly how it works, but otherwise we can take questions as well. I don't know what everybody else would like.
Got one question, which is the use case I'm working with is where the CNAB has Kubernetes manifest files, Kubernetes configuration files inside it, full of image references. Okay, so when we do image relocation, when we do relocation of the bundle, the invocation image needs to know the before and after image references, so it can do translation of the Kubernetes files before it applies them. So the fact there are images, the fact that this representation can handle the images in the bundle neatly is good. But what about the references inside the invocation image?
So we had the same issue with Docker app, which we've solved. You can take a look at that. Simon probably will have the exact details of how we did that. But basically, we feed that in as a parameter into the invocation image because we know which where we're referencing them from. So if you just because all the images are in the same repo. So how Docker app works is when you push the app, it freezes all the chars of the images. It pushes all the service images to the same repo. It then pushes the OCI index and pushes the invocation image and then pushes the OCI index. Then when you want to run it, you just tell it which repo, it knows which repo you're referencing, so it can inject just that my repo / app, and then
okay.
and then it just uses the chars to represent.
Right. So that depends upon the all the image names having been digested. Essentially, image references being digested. Yeah.
Yep. So we think this is logical because a version of an application only makes sense if the underlying components are frozen. If you start letting people freeform the underlying components, then the version of the app just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's true in production. Not sure about prototyping, but fair point.
Yeah, for the developer case, so it should be flexible, but otherwise, no.
Okay, thank you.
Even production, though, you've got to be careful about OS and framework patching scenarios. So I don't think it's that clear.
In my mind, you should push the whole thing through a CI/CD if you want to change the underlying images, because if you don't do that, you can't be guaranteed it's going to work.
I agree conceptually, but I think that there's an overstatement there that we should be careful to let customers choose depending on their scenarios. And this is the exact scenarios we've been working through with tasks, and everything you're talking about, it makes perfect sense. Like all the scenarios you're talking about are absolutely legit. Just there's a flexibility on must versus have, and I think Glyn is referring to some of the problems of the image movements as well become a challenge.
Yeah, so just from a practical standpoint with Docker app, it's open source and people are using it. So what we've done is taken the most extreme cases in many cases and used that, and then we're slowly opening it up to other use cases as we see value. Because the problem is if we just let people template and do whatever they want, then we'll end up in a world with something that doesn't make any sense anymore. So we've just been super conservative. That's why I'm using that line.
I want to let someone do the demo, and so we can open up more for conversation.
Yeah, sure. So
I need to unshare. Oh, there you go.
So okay, so yeah, I have a little synapse to CI demo. I will just start with a very simple hello world bundle, which has just one invocation image. It doesn't have parameters, credentials, or component images, just for making things simpler. And so what I want to do is to use cnab-spec to push it to a registry. Good. And after that, what I want to do is put it back, but this time as an OCI layout. So that's something I've added today. Cnab-spec, it's not yet merged. So what it does. Okay. Let's use another. Yeah. So I'm just extract this one, so we can see what is made. So an OCI layout is basically a partial dump of a repository. So the root of this thing is this index.json thing that lists all the manifests that I've exported. So in this case, I exported only the OCI index that contains the CNAB string. And so this digest is for E77. We just rename this guy so I can format it. So this is the OCI index that we create. So this OCI index returns a bunch of manifests. I will detail that a little later, and a bunch of annotations. These annotations are the metadata that we hope would be good to have inside the top level document for making registry able to index that in some sort. And also we found that some of the metadata that we have in CNAB also map quite well with existing well-known annotations in the OCI spec. So for example, we have authors, description, title, version, that are already well-known annotations in this work. So we use that. Actually, it's not this stone. We could store that a little differently. It's not big deal. It's just for making it easier for registries UI to leverage this information. So now for the manifest. So we saw that this particular bundle just had an invocation image, and we see that we have a link to an image which is marked with IOCNAB manifest type invocation. It's this image. If we look at this guy here, this one, it's actually a Docker image. It's a Docker image that has been provided, and we can see that it's referenced deeply. So when I did my OCI export, I don't only get the information about what is embedded in the JSON, but I also extract every single image reference within it, down to each individual layer. To see this one, I can see that it's part of my archive. For a big bundle perspective, having working with OCI index gives us OCI layout export and import for free. It might be a good way to implementing the big bundle. And also, all these blobs are actually exactly the same as what is in the registry. So if I've used Notary to sign my OCI index in my registry, I could theoretically just get the digital signature and the public key of the signer. And when I get my OCI index archive, I could actually validate the authenticity of the OCI index locally using the same digital signature material. So that's it for the invocation image. Alongside this particular manifest, we also returns config objects. So C48 something. It's just something quite similar to what ORAS does. It's just a blob wrapped in an image manifest with a custom config media type, so that it can be pulled by an existing registry client like Docker or containerd or anything. And it references this file, which is actually a partial bundle JSON file. So it's a bundle JSON file minus all the image references and minus the metadata that we put inside the OCI index. We had a discussion this afternoon or this morning for you about duplicating the info so that we would have a config object that would be much closer to what a bundle JSON file is. And I think it's a good idea. So in the future, we could have this config object being a bundle.json without any images in it, being component images or invocation images. So now the interesting thing is that so if I do, I'm running also an internal registry, local registry. So if I do something like so if I push this guy into my local registry, so it just takes the table and push it like it. One thing that is interesting is that if I pull it if I pull it back, yeah. Yeah. And if I share some, oh, I'm not in the right. If I share some those things, so if I look at export to .tar and relocate to .tar, it's actually exactly the same content. It does not change while relocating. But if I do, so now not an export, but something like that, but will reconstruct my bundle.json. What we can see is that when I reconstruct the thing, it will reconstruct this with an image, an invocation image that comes from the registry from which I pulled. And if I do that with the original image, it's a long to type. This one. So in each case, we have the exact same content in each registry, but the fact that we are reconstructing this bundle.json file from this, we are actually about to regenerate image reference with an absolute repo/image/ and digest reference, so that we can actually do things like taking my OCI layout with its digital signature, copy that into an air-gap environment, push that into a registry inside that air-gap environment. I can then validate the digital signature, and if I try to deploy it, it will actually pull all invocation image and service images from this air-gap registry as well.
Simon, question: would it be possible to populate the original image field with the original image name?
Yes, actually, it's something that didn't exist in the spec before we worked on cnab-spec, and we haven't taken the time to do it. But yeah, we need to populate the original image name.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Simon, we should probably leave time for questions as well, unless you have something.
Yeah, I have nothing more to show, so we can have discussion now.
Oh, sorry for calling you Simon.
No, Simon is good.
All right, so I think we have 3 more agenda items, but I wanted to get a quick poll from the group if we wanted to do questions for this and leave the 3 agenda items for next week, or if we wanted to address those sooner rather than later. They seem quick and potentially able to do in the next 4 minutes, but I want to double check with everyone.
I think we need to announce the CODEOWNERS change because that already got merged in, but it's very I think it's very trivial, and Glyn can probably do it in 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, I need to make an abject apology because I kind of rushed in a change. But basically, the code owners file has changed on duffle so that PRs are no longer assigned all the code owners as reviewers, which seems to cause a lot of confusion. And from what I could tell, so if anybody's uncomfortable with that change, and there's a link to it in the minutes, I'm happy to revert and then circle back around and discuss that again. But if there's no objections, we'll leave that be.
Thank you.
Okay, that sounds good. And then I think I'm just reading off this other two. So rename digest to content digest. Looks like that there's a issue for this.
We can take that on Slack. Sure.
Okay. Awesome. And then the last one is adding a 1.0 and post 1.0 label to issues and PRs.
I think we created labels for both of those, and the idea would be, since we're going to try and get the 1.0 of the cnab-spec and of duffle done by the end of June, then we would start dividing things up into things that need to be taken on in the core spec before we can release, and things that can be comfortably deferred till after.
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry to cut that OCI conversation short. I think we can continue that conversation in Slack if that's okay with you all, or we can add another agenda item for the next meeting. But I think this calls it, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to bring up.
Just wanted to say that I think we're in a place where at least we have the discussion for OCI registry for CNAB in a place where we have at least informed decisions from both perspectives, and I think that going forward in the next couple of weeks we can have discussions around. I think all of us on the call have ideas about how to go forward, and I think getting together at KubeCon for a couple of minutes to discuss is going to be good. And then, yeah, we really want to go forward with the registry specification in the next couple of weeks. So ideas are welcome. Thanks.
We shouldn't make the decision at KubeCon though, because nobody will be there, but it will. Whoever will be there, we can chat.
Yeah, I think it probably makes sense to have this be an agenda item next time, if for no other reason, to summarize what was discussed at KubeCon.
All right. If there's nothing else, I think this is the end of the meeting. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for the overview.